Hello everybody and welcome back to another version of ARCA's Elevated Views. Today we're going to be discussing the building code. What's in the code, what is code, and what is not in the code. My name is Kevin Kramers. I'm the ARCA's technical officer with about 30 years of construction experience. So I've been around building codes ever since I was at NAIT, and I still have the 1985 Alberta Building Code on my shelf at home. And I'd also like to welcome Dave, who's going to be joining this nice conversation today. Morning, Dave.
Morning, Kevin. How are you doing today? And my experience with code has been working through NAIT as well, with general contractor, and then I was several years with the City of Edmonton working in infrastructure, and now with ARCA. So thanks for having me. So Kevin, what's one of the most common questions you receive on building codes?
I would say one of the most common questions we get on the phone, either from both residential and commercial building owners or property managers, is the Alberta Building Code, which is now referred to as the National Building Code Alberta Edition. Is that the same as the ARCA application standards, which there is a lot of miscommunication out there, and the answer is no. We do have the National Building Code Alberta Edition in effect in Alberta, and what that does is it sets the minimum standard for any new construction or additions that are constructed in Alberta, but the ARCA application standards are actually a step above that. We are never below the building code, but we indicate what is good roofing practice, which is usually one or two steps above what the building code is.
So Kevin, one of the questions I get, and we need some clarity around this, is what's the difference between residential codes and commercial codes in Alberta?
I often get that question, and we discuss it with some of our roofing standard classes as well too. Really in Alberta, the building code is set into two different sections. One is commercial buildings and institutional buildings, and the other is small buildings, which is more housing, small, say 4-story or less apartment buildings. Right. And what the building code has done is it has given the professionals a lot of the responsibility and the ability to design systems that work specific to their buildings on commercial buildings, while with residential construction, anybody really can build their own house. So the residential codes are quite a bit more prescriptive than the commercial codes, whereas it gets down into minimum thicknesses that you need for sheathing, minimum fasteners that you need. It really drills down to the minute details. While the commercial code, a lot of people are quite surprised when I say really the only code for commercial roofing is only about a third of a page long in the National Building Code, in the Alberta edition. Right. It's really keep it watertight, but it's up to the professionals to design that system so that it works with the entire building envelope of that building.
What I'm hearing is there's a lot of minimum standards in residential code, but what's really been the biggest code change in roofing in the last 10 years?
I would say in the last 10 years, commercial-wise, the biggest change has been the introduction of the new wind uplift standard. So starting in 2019, when we adopted the 2015 National Building Code here in Alberta, a new CSA standard was implemented in the building code for all membrane roofing to comply with the new wind uplift standard. So to back that up a bit, just to give you a little bit of context, most low slope roofing that does not have ballast has forces on it that are outside basically the live load and the dead load that's on the roof. You have wind loads, you have stack effect that's working with unability, and you also have to take into account the interior building pressure. And what the National Research Council found through their SIDGERS group is that there's actually a wind uplift force on that roof, so the membrane can actually billow up or is being uplifted by pressures within and outside of that building. So they set some parameters. They set what the testing would look like within an encapsulated system that they test the different membranes, so that they make sure in all of the different climatic zones in Canada and all the different geographical zones, that roof is adhered down so that you don't get the roof blowing off, you don't get any damage caused by normal wind events. It's adhered differently, it's mechanically fastened differently, so it really secures that roofing membrane down. One of the common questions that we often get too is, are ballasted roofs, so roofs that are held down with ballast or gravel or pavers on top, why aren't those included when we say the membrane roofing systems in the building code? It's actually a pretty simple answer. Nobody wants to put gravel ballast inside any of these testing chambers that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to be peppered with the rocks and destroy the testing chamber itself. So it will come a time where we will have ballast in there. They're working on what kind of testing you can have for ballasted systems. But right now they're really focused on membranes themselves and not ballasted systems.
This is amazing information, Kevin, because a lot of times there's a lot of confusion around building code and code revision. One question I have today is, I hear a lot about factory mutual testing. Is it really that much different than wind uplift testing?
In two different ways, I would say. One, factory mutual, some people don't understand, but factory mutual is actually a large insurance organization in the United States. So they insure buildings, and part of their risk management of all of their buildings, they do a tremendous amount of research around fire and wind damage for buildings that they insure. So they were the first to look at how wind affects roofs, and they have a very extensive database of different assemblies that have been tested. But when FM tests any type of wind effect on a roof, they test it with constant pressure.
Okay.
So it's tested more in a wind tunnel than what the CSA testing is. So the CSA tested is called dynamic wind uplift testing. So when it is tested, it is actually different bursts of wind uplift are introduced to that. So it simulates more of the real life situation. You don't have a steady wind all the time. You usually get bursts of winds or pockets of winds, and that actually creates more movement on the membrane than a static test, such as factory mutual could do. So that's usually the biggest difference. The other difference is in Alberta, factory mutual is not in the building code.
That's right.
We have the CSA standard is the minimum that is to be built within the building code. Factory mutual is more of an additional risk mitigation practice. Having said that, there are buildings in the province of Alberta that are insured by factory mutual and that need to be built to a factory mutual standard, but it is not the same. And a lot of people get that confused. They think, well, if it's FM 90, that means it's just as good as a CSA wind uplift testing. And the truth of the matter is, it's not. They're apples and oranges. They're two different types of tests.
This is all really relevant information because a lot of these questions do come to me as well, Kevin, and I really appreciate you kind of explaining how the code kind of laces through the entire design and construction industry. Let's talk about enforcement now. This is something that it's really important because it's how the code is enforced, especially in Alberta. Is it the law? There's so many things around enforcement that confuse a lot of design and construction professionals. Can you kind of explain to us how enforcement is done with the code?
They're in place for a very good reason. Looking back, I think the first building code in Alberta was introduced to help life safety, to help people in the event, protect them from the elements and prevent them from being hurt in a house or in any kind of structure. Whenever the new codes come out, slight changes are made because they have found that they do produce a risk to whomever's in that building. So the first step in enforcing those kind of rules, you could say, or the codes, is usually done through the municipalities. There's no person walking around like a health and safety and police officer and peace officer. You don't see people walking around with building codes officer on the back of their jackets.
That's right.
But it's the municipalities that check the plans and issue the development permits and the building permits. They're the first ones and the first step in making sure that any new building built in the province is built to that minimum standard of the National Building Code.
One point that I was thinking about is how the code is actually the law. And that to me is very important. It's just not a suggested activity. It's not a minimum standard. The Alberta Code is the law of the land. It's be charged under it. Let's just briefly talk about how the severity of not following the code and not understanding the code in your specific line of business.
Well, and even outside of roofing, like you say, it is not really as understood out there that the building code is the law. A lot of people watch HGTV and they hear some of the hosts are saying, oh, this is just built to the minimum code. The minimum acceptable building practice is what is stipulated in the National Building Code. There's 5 main ingredients when it comes to the building code. You have life safety, you have fire safety, structural protection, the environment, and health safety. So you have all those 5 different aspects that really zero in on what every code line is for. So they don't make them just to make them, they make them for the betterment of everybody who is experiencing that building. But it is the law. Can you build above it? Absolutely. Many people do. But it is actually a crime, like you say, that if you build below it, you can be charged. Say if there's a failure in a building, say the floor joists that you use in residential construction are not rated for the load that's going to be put on them, and they collapse.
Right. So as design and construction professionals in the province, I think we've all seen that this last 10, 15 years. Condo construction failures are getting to be more prevalent, and as we know, it's there will be charges coming from that.
And one thing I also get, and it's a good question, Dave, is where do you think those building codes are available from?
I'll explain what I know anyway. It's all about access, so they're available online to the entire general public. They're easily searchable, they're up to date. They used to be where you had to get them through certain organizations, Queen's Printer, etc., etc. Codes are available online, accessible daily, and updated as they change and are current. So really important that everybody knows that they're not just available to purchase anymore. They're for everybody to utilize and to design and build with.
And a lot of people do have questions. We get it from residential homeowners to commercial contractors, just not familiar enough with searching those codes. And if you spend 5-10 minutes with somebody, you can point them out to where to find them, point out the easiest ways to search through them. It is a skill. When I was in school, we learned how to read the codes because they are a little bit different to read and a little bit different to understand. But most people are pretty open to exploring that with people and saying, let's take it step by step, and it's easy to find it.
Understanding the code is very important.
Absolutely.
Right. Was there anything else we wanted to cover today, Kevin, as far as code stories? Was there anything you'd like to share?
Related to roofing, one of the common questions I get is, you really do feel for some people when they phone you. They just spend a lot of their savings, say they're building a $2 million house, and they look up on the roof and they say, oh, there's no drip edge and they didn't put any underlayment on, and I want to sue the builder because I don't think they did it right. In the ARCA standards, it calls for drip edge and underlayment and all these extra things, and they didn't do it. So how can I go after them in court? And we spend time with these people to discuss it with them and say, the builder did build to the minimum building code. You don't require drip edge per the building code. You don't require underlayment. Is it good roofing practice to do it? Yes, 100% it is. But that doesn't mean they have broken the law by not doing that. And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. I spend all this money and put the porcelain in floors and the marble on the countertops, and then they put the least amount of money onto the roof, and then they wonder why they have problems in the end. The biggest takeaway I take from that is you really have to look at the whole picture. You have to look at the whole building envelope. You have to look at everything. 1, do your research, and 2, if you don't know, reach out. People are more than happy to help.
That's really good advice, Kevin. Construction is what's in and what's out, and a lot of people do put the dollars, the budgets into other things besides the core items like we're talking about today. So great discussion, great thoughts around minimum code, something that's really important that I took away from today. Just really appreciated talking to you today.
Oh, you as well, Dave. It's been great. And for anybody who's listening, we want to mention that if you do have questions, reach out. That's what we're here for. We're here to answer those questions around roofing and point you in the right direction. We hope that you've enjoyed this version of Elevated Views, maybe taken away a couple tips and tricks that you can use. And we hope that you stay tuned for future versions of ARCA's Elevated Views.